I never thought I'd fall in love at work, especially not with my boss. I definitely never imagined that a crumpled piece of paper in my pocket would be the thing that changed everything. My name is Alex. I'm 24 years old, and this is the story of how I met the love of my life in the most unexpected way possible. It all started 6 months ago when I got hired at Wavelength Creative, a boutique marketing agency in downtown Seattle. I was fresh out of college, armed with a graphic design degree and approximately zero real-world experience. So when I got the call offering me a junior designer position, I literally screamed so loud my roommate thought I was being attacked. The salary wasn't amazing, but it was a foot in the door at a company known for its innovative campaigns and inclusive workplace culture. And as a young gay man, still figuring out my place in the professional world, that last part meant everything. To me, my first day was a tornado of introductions, software tutorials, and trying to remember whether the bathroom was the third door on the left or the fourth door on the right. I met the whole team, a wonderful mix of creative personalities, quirky designers, sharp copywriters, and enthusiastic account managers, but I didn't meet him until the afternoon. His name was Ryan Mitchell. He was the creative director, my direct supervisor, and at 29 years old, he was basically the golden child of the company. Everyone talked about Ryan with this mixture of respect and admiration. How he'd joined Wavelength right after getting his master's degree, how he'd single-handedly landed their biggest client with a pitch he'd put together in 48 hours, how he could look at a design for 3 seconds and know exactly what was wrong and how to fix it. I was honestly terrified to meet him, imagining some intimidating genius who would take one look at my portfolio and realize they'd made a horrible mistake hiring me. Oh. And then he walked into the design bullpen, and I forgot how to breathe. Was tall, maybe 6'1", with dark hair that was professionally styled, but had this one rebellious piece that fell across his forehead. Warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and this presence that just filled the room. Without being overwhelming, he was wearing dark jeans, crisp white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and these glasses that should have made him look nerdy, but somehow made him look even more attractive. And I realized with a sinking feeling in my stomach that I was absolutely, completely, ridiculously attracted to my new boss. He shook my hand, welcomed me to the team, made a joke about how the coffee machine was temperamental but worth the effort, and asked if I needed anything to get settled in. And the whole time I was nodding and smiling and trying to form coherent sentences while internally screaming at myself to get it together. That first week was torture in the best possible way. Ryan was everything everyone said he was, brilliant and creative and dedicated. But he was also kind and patient and funny in this subtle, dry way that caught you off guard. He'd stop by my desk to check on projects, leaning over my shoulder, to look at my screen, and I'd catch a hint of his cologne, something clean and cedar-scented, and completely lose my train of thought. He always dressed impeccably, rotating between designer jeans and tailored slacks, button-downs in different colors, occasionally a blazer when he had client meetings. And I found myself looking forward to seeing what he'd wear each day like some kind of fashion-obsessed schoolgirl with a crush. But the worst part, or maybe the best part, was that Ryan seemed completely oblivious to the effect he had on me. He treated me exactly like he treated everyone else on the team, professional and friendly, offering constructive feedback on my work, praising me when I did something well, gently correcting me when I made mistakes, and never once giving any indication that he saw me as anything other than his newest junior designer. I told myself it was fine, it was better this way. Workplace crushes were cliché and problematic, and I needed to focus on actually doing my job instead of mooning over my attractive boss. I threw myself into my work, staying late to refine designs, volunteering for extra projects, learning everything I could about the industry and the company and our clients. I made friends with the other designers, started getting lunch with the copywriting team, joined the company's softball league even though I was terrible at sports, and generally tried to build a life at Wavelength that wasn't centered around my hopeless attraction to Ryan Mitchell. And then everything changed because of a piece of paper and a pair of pants. It was a Friday afternoon about 3 months into my job. We had just landed a huge new client, a sustainable fashion brand that wanted to completely revamp their digital presence. Ryan called an all-hands meeting to announce the news and divvy up responsibilities. And everyone was buzzing with excitement because this was exactly the kind of progressive, value-driven client that Wavelength loved to work with. I was thrilled to be assigned to the design team for the account, even though I knew I'd probably be doing more grunt work than creative direction. After the meeting, Ryan asked me to stay behind, and my heart did this stupid little flip because being alone with him still made me nervous in a way I couldn't quite control. He closed the conference room door and turned to face me, and for one insane second, I thought he was going to say something personal, something about us. But then he smiled, that professional smile, and asked if I'd be comfortable taking the lead. On designing the brand's social media templates, I must have looked shocked because he laughed and explained that he'd been really impressed with my work on a recent Instagram campaign, that I had a good eye for clean, modern aesthetics that would work perfectly for this client, and that he thought this was a great opportunity for me to step up and show what I could do. I said yes, obviously, trying not to sound as excited and terrified as I felt, and he clapped me on the shoulder and told me he had complete faith in me. His hand lingered for just a second longer than necessary, warm and solid through my shirt, and I felt this electricity run down my spine that made me wonder if maybe, possibly, there was something more there than just a boss appreciating an employee's work. But then he was pulling away, already talking about timeline and deliverables and client expectations, and I pushed the thought aside and focused on not screwing up this incredible opportunity he was giving me. The next few weeks were a blur of mood boards and mock-ups, client calls and revision rounds, late nights at the office and weekend work sessions. Ryan was heavily involved in the project, checking in regularly, offering suggestions and feedback, pushing me to think bigger and bolder while also reining me in when I got too experimental. We developed this rhythm, this creative partnership that felt natural and energizing, and I found myself falling even harder for him. Not just because he was attractive, but because working with him was like finding the other half of my creative brain. We'd bounce ideas off each other, finish each other's sentences, get into passionate debates about typography and color theory that would leave us both laughing at how nerdy we were being. The rest of the team started joking that Ryan had found his protege, that we were like the dynamic duo of design. And every time someone said it, I'd feel this warm glow of pride mixed with the bittersweet ache of knowing that this was probably as close as I'd ever get to him. And then came the night that changed everything. We were working late on a final presentation for the client, just the two of us in the office. The city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room. We'd been at it for hours, fueled by terrible coffee and determination. And we were both getting a little punchy from exhaustion. Ryan had taken off his glasses to rub his eyes, and I'd rolled up my sleeves and unbuttoned the top button of my shirt because the office AC had stopped working properly. And there was this moment where we both looked up at the same time and just started laughing at how ridiculous we must look. Two grown men hunched over a laptop at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night, obsessing over the exact shade of green for a social media template. The laughter broke the tension, and suddenly we were talking about things that had nothing to do with work. Swapping stories about our worst college jobs, debating the merits of Seattle versus other major cities, talking about our families and friends and the things we did outside of the office. I learned that Ryan was from Portland, that he had two younger sisters he was super protective of, that he played guitar in an indie band in college, that he was obsessed with hiking and had climbed Mount Rainier twice. He learned that I'd grown up in a small town in Oregon, that I'd come out to my parents when I was 17, and they'd been surprisingly supportive, that I was terrible at cooking but great at baking, that I had a rescue dog named Picasso who was the love of my life. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, as Ryan was telling me about a disastrous camping trip where his tent had blown into a lake, I realized that he was looking at me differently, that his eyes were soft and warm and maybe interested in a way that had nothing to do with work. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it, and I was trying to decide if I was imagining things or if this was actually happening when he suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence and looked down at the table, and I saw this faint blush creep across his cheeks that made him look younger and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. The moment hung there between us, heavy with possibility. and I was gathering my courage to say something, anything, when Ryan's phone buzzed with an email notification, and the spell was broken. He cleared his throat, straightened his glasses, and suggested we call it a night and come back fresh in the morning. I agreed, disappointed but also relieved, because I had no idea what I would have said or done if that moment had continued. We packed up our stuff in slightly awkward silence, and as we were heading to the elevator, Ryan mentioned that the client presentation was scheduled for next Friday, which was also his birthday, and he was hoping we'd nail it so he could celebrate properly. I made some joke about that being a lot of pressure, and he laughed and said he'd buy me lunch if we landed the contract. I said deal, and then we were in the parking garage saying goodnight and heading to our separate cars, and I drove home. With my head spinning and my heart racing, that weekend I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan, about that moment in the conference room, about whether I'd imagined the way he'd looked at me or if there really was something there. I talked to my roommate Jamie, who was very gay and very wise about these matters, and he listened to me ramble for an hour before saying that it sounded like Ryan might be interested, but that I needed to be careful because workplace relationships were complicated, especially when there was a power dynamic involved. I knew he was right, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was different. Whatever was happening between us was special and worth taking a risk for. So I made a decision, a crazy, impulsive, potentially career-ending decision. I was going to tell Ryan how I felt. Not right away and not at work, but I was going to find the right moment, and I was going to be honest with him about my feelings. And whatever happened after that would happen. I wanted to do it in a way that felt meaningful, that showed him I'd been paying attention to all those conversations we'd had. I cared about him as a person and not just as my attractive boss. And that's when I remembered his birthday and the client presentation, and I got an idea. Ryan had mentioned once, in passing during one of our late-night work sessions, that when he was a kid his grandfather used to write him birthday poems. Nothing fancy or professional, just silly rhymes about whatever Ryan was interested in that year. He'd said it was one of his favorite childhood memories. He still had all the poems his grandfather had written before he passed away, and that he missed that kind of personal, thoughtful gesture now that he was an adult and birthdays had become more about expensive dinners and generic greeting cards. So I decided I was going to write Ryan a poem for his birthday. Not a work poem, not something professional or safe, but a real poem that told him how I felt, how much I admired him, how much working with him had meant to me, and yes, how much I was falling for him. I spent the entire weekend working on it, writing and rewriting, trying to find the right words that were honest but not too intense, romantic but not creepy, personal but not inappropriate. I must have gone through 50 drafts before I finally had something I was happy with, something that felt true and genuine and like it came from my heart. I handwrote it on nice paper, folded it carefully, and put it in my pocket Monday morning, planning to slip it onto his desk when he wasn't looking. Maybe leave it there for him to find after the client presentation, a birthday gift, and a confession. All in one. But of course, things didn't go according to plan because when have they ever? The week leading up to the presentation was chaos. Last-minute changes and client requests and technical difficulties that had us all working around the clock. By Thursday night, we were exhausted but confident. The presentation was polished and ready, and Ryan sent everyone home early to get some rest before the big day. I went home, fed Picasso, tried on 6 different outfits for the presentation tomorrow, and finally collapsed into bed with the poem still in my jacket pocket, planning to transfer it to my pants pocket in the morning so I could give it to Ryan. After we hopefully knocked the client's socks off. Friday morning I woke up late because my alarm didn't go off, threw on my favorite dark gray slacks and a navy button-down shirt, grabbed my laptop bag, and ran out the door, completely forgetting about the poem until I was already on the bus heading to the office. I patted my jacket pocket and realized with horror that the jacket I was wearing wasn't the same jacket from yesterday, which meant the poem was still in my other jacket, which was hanging in my closet at home. I felt sick, disappointed in myself for screwing up what was supposed to be this perfect romantic gesture, but there was nothing I could do about it now. I had a presentation to focus on, and I'd just have to give him the poem another time. The presentation went incredibly well, better than we could have hoped. The client loved everything: the brand aesthetic, the social media templates, the whole campaign strategy we'd put together. By the end of the meeting, they were talking about expanding the contract and bringing us on for additional projects. Everyone was thrilled, high-fiving and hugging and celebrating, and Ryan pulled me aside to tell me I'd done an amazing job, that my designs were the star of the show, and that he was really proud of me. The way he said it, looking right into my eyes with this genuine warmth and affection, made my breath catch. And I thought about the poem in my other jacket and wished desperately that I could tell him everything right then and there. Instead, I just thanked him and said it was all because of his guidance and leadership, which was true, but also felt inadequate compared to what I really wanted to say. The team decided to go out for drinks to celebrate, and someone reminded Ryan. It was his birthday, and before I knew it, we were all at this trendy bar downtown, toasting to the new client and to Ryan's 29th year. I was nursing a beer and trying to work up the courage to pull Ryan aside and tell him I had a birthday gift for him that I'd forgotten at home. When one of the account managers suggested we all go around and say what we appreciated most about working with Ryan, it was cheesy but sweet, and everyone shared stories about times Ryan had helped them, or inspired them, or made them better at their jobs. And when it got to my turn, I felt my face flush as everyone looked at me expectantly. I started talking about how Ryan had taken a chance on me when I was just a nervous new grad, how he'd pushed me to grow and believe in myself, how working with him had taught me that creativity was about collaboration and trust and being brave, enough to try things even when you weren't sure they'd work. And as I was talking, I saw Ryan's expression change, soften, his eyes getting a little shiny, like maybe he was actually touched by what I was saying. I realized that even without the poem, I was saying something real and important. The night continued, more drinks and laughter, and eventually the group started to thin out as people headed home, till it was just me and Ryan and a couple of other stragglers. Ryan suggested we grab some food because none of us had eaten dinner, and we ended up at this late-night Thai place. And somewhere between the pad Thai and the spring rolls, the other people left, and it was just the two of us again, sitting across from each other in a booth, the rest of the restaurant nearly empty. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. And it felt like that night in the conference room, but even better because the work pressure was off and we could just be ourselves. Ryan told me about his birthday tradition of hiking alone to reflect on the past year. And I told him about how I used to make elaborate birthday cakes for my friends in college. Somehow the conversation drifted to relationships and dating, and what we were looking for in life. I was terrified but also exhilarated because it felt like we were dancing around something, testing the waters, seeing if the other person would take the leap. And then Ryan asked very casually if I was seeing anyone, and I said no. And he said, me neither. And there was this pause where we just looked at each other, and I could feel the question hanging in the air between us. I was about to say something. Maybe ask him if he wanted to grab coffee sometime outside of work, when the waiter came to clear our plates, and the moment passed. We paid the bill, splitting it despite Ryan's protest that it was his birthday and he should treat. And then we were outside in the cool Seattle night, standing on the sidewalk. Both of us clearly not wanting the evening to end, but not knowing how to make it continue. Ryan's apartment was in the opposite direction from mine, and he'd taken an Uber to the bar earlier and I'd driven, so I offered him a ride home without really thinking about it. He accepted, and we walked to my car in comfortable silence, and I was so focused on not doing anything stupid or embarrassing that I didn't notice when my phone fell out of my pocket as I was getting my keys out. We drove through the city, making small talk about the neighborhoods we were passing. And when we got to his building, Ryan thanked me for the ride and for everything I'd said earlier at the bar. He said he meant it when he said he was proud of me, that I was talented and hardworking, and he was glad I was on his team. I told him happy birthday, that I hoped his 29th year would be amazing, and he smiled this smile that made my heart skip and said it was off to a pretty good start. He got out of the car, and I watched him walk to his building. Just as he was about to go inside, he turned and waved, and I waved back. And then he was gone, and I was sitting there feeling like I'd missed 100 opportunities to tell him how I felt. I drove home in a daze, replaying the entire night in my head, analyzing every word and gesture and look. trying to figure out if I'd been reading the signals right or if I was just projecting my feelings onto a situation that was purely professional. Friendship. When I got home, I collapsed onto my couch and Picasso jumped up to cuddle with me. And I buried my face in his fur and told him I was a coward who couldn't even give his boss a birthday poem. And that's when I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked my jacket, my laptop bag between the couch cushions, everywhere I could think of, but it was gone. I tried to remember the last time I'd had it, and I realized it must have fallen. Out when I was getting my keys at the Thai restaurant parking lot, I groaned, too tired to drive back there tonight, figuring I'd go first thing in the morning to retrieve it. But then I had a horrible thought. What if someone had already taken it? What if it was gone forever with all my photos and contacts? And apps? I was about to have a full panic attack when my laptop chimed with a message. It was from Ryan, sent through the company's Slack, and my heart jumped into my throat as I opened it. The message said, "Hey, I think you dropped your phone in your car. I found it on the floor when I was getting out. Hope you didn't panic too much when you realized it was missing. I'll bring it to the office Monday, or I can drop it off tomorrow if you need it urgently." I felt relieved and embarrassed. Relieved that my phone wasn't lost, but embarrassed that Ryan had found it and now knew. I was careless enough to drop my phone in my own car. I messaged back saying, "Thank you so much and Monday is fine, no rush. And sorry for the trouble." And he responded immediately with no trouble at all. And I added a smiley face emoji, which felt weird, but also kind of nice. I went to bed feeling lighter than I had in weeks, partially because my phone wasn't lost, and partially because I'd had this amazing evening with Ryan that felt like it meant something. Saturday I slept in late, took Picasso for a long walk, did some laundry, and tried not to think about the fact that Ryan had my phone and would be looking at it to make sure it was mine and might see. It's my lock screen, which was a photo of Picasso wearing a bow tie at my friend's wedding. Sunday, I went to brunch with Jamie and told him everything that had happened. And he listened with wide eyes and then said I needed to just tell Ryan how I felt because clearly there was something there, and I was going to drive myself crazy trying to decode every interaction. I knew he was right, but I was still terrified of ruining everything, making things awkward at work, of losing not just a potential relationship, but also this incredible professional partnership and friendship I've built with Ryan. Monday morning, I got to work early, nervous about seeing Ryan and getting my phone back, but he wasn't in yet. I busied myself with emails and project work, trying not to watch the door every 5 seconds. And when he finally walked in around 9:30, my heart did its usual stupid flutter. He had my phone in his hand, and he came straight to my desk. With this weird expression on his face, something between concerned and excited and nervous, and I immediately wondered if something was wrong. He handed me the phone and said we should probably talk and maybe grab a conference room, and I felt my stomach drop because that sounded ominous. Like he'd seen something on my phone that had made him uncomfortable and now he was going to have an awkward HR conversation with me about appropriate workplace boundaries. I followed him to an empty conference room in a daze, my mind racing through everything that could have gone wrong. And when he closed the door and turned to face me, I was already mentally drafting my resignation letter. But instead of looking angry or uncomfortable, Ryan looked almost shy, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him. And he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, folded and slightly wrinkled, and I recognized it immediately as my poem. My blood turned to ice. The poem wasn't in my phone. It was in my jacket, in my other jacket, at home in my closet. How did he have it? How was this possible? And then I remembered Friday morning running late, grabbing what I thought was an empty pair of pants. But they weren't empty. They were the pants I'd worn earlier in the week when I'd initially put the poem in my pocket. I was planning to give it to Ryan, except I'd changed my mind and put it in my jacket instead, or so I thought. But apparently I'd put it in my pants pocket and then forgotten about it because I'd been wearing different pants the day I put it in my jacket, which meant the poem had been in my pocket during the entire presentation and the entire night at the bar and the entire car ride to Ryan's apartment, just sitting there waiting to betray me. Ryan must have seen the horror on my face because he quickly said, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have read it. I know it's private, but it fell out of your pocket. When I was picking up your phone from your car floor and I saw my name and I I couldn't help myself. I read it, and Alex, I had no idea you felt this way. I wanted to die, to melt into the floor, to open the window and jump out, even though we were only on the 3rd floor. I tried to form words, to apologize, to explain, to salvage what was left of my dignity and my job, but nothing came out except a strangled sound that might have been the beginning of an apology or a denial or just a general expression of mortification. Ryan took a step closer, still holding the poem, and he said, "Alex, please don't freak out because I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, okay?" And I nodded, because what else could I do? He took a breath, looked me right in the eyes, and said, "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I have feelings for you for the past 2 months. I've been driving myself crazy trying to keep things professional because you're brilliant and talented, and I didn't want to be that boss who makes things weird, but every time we work together, every time you smile at me, every time you get excited about a design, I fall a little more. And finding this poem last night, reading how you feel about me, it's like the universe finally gave me permission to stop pretending this is just professional." I stared at him, completely unable to process what he was saying, because it sounded like Ryan, my boss Ryan Mitchell, the creative director, the golden child of Wavelength Creative, was saying he had feelings for me too. He smiled, nervous and hopeful, and said, "I know this is complicated and we'll have to figure out the work stuff and talk to HR and be really careful about how we handle this, but Alex, I really like you, and if you're willing to try, I'd like to take you on an actual date, not a work dinner, not a team celebration, but a real date where we can see if this thing between us is as good as I think it could be." I finally found my voice and said, You read the poem and it didn't freak you out?" And he laughed and said, "Alex, it's the most romantic thing anyone has ever done for me. Your grandfather would have been proud." And I said, "That was your grandfather's tradition, not mine." And he said, "I know, but you listened. You remembered something. I told you in passing, and you cared enough to do something about it. How could that possibly freak me out?" And then I was laughing too, giddy with relief and joy and disbelief. And I said, "Yes, I want to go on a date with you. I've wanted that since literally my first day here." And he grinned and said, "Really first day?" Because it took me at least a week to realize how much trouble I was in. We stood there smiling at each other like idiots, and then Ryan glanced at the conference room door and said, "We should probably keep this professional at work at least until we talk to HR. But I'm taking you to dinner Friday night somewhere nice. Somewhere that's not Thai food, even though I love Thai food." And I said, "Okay, yes, absolutely." And he said, "Good." And then he handed me back the poem and said, "You should keep this. It's yours. I just wanted you to know I'd read it." And I said, "You can keep it if you want. I wrote it for you anyway." And his face did this thing where it went soft and warm, and he carefully folded the poem, put it back in his pocket like it was something precious. We went back to work trying to act normal, but everyone could tell something had changed. Kept catching each other's eyes across the office and smiling. And finally, one of the other designers asked if we'd want another client or something because we both looked way too happy for a Monday morning. That week was the longest and shortest of my life, trying to focus on work while counting down to Friday, stealing moments to text Ryan silly things and getting silly things back, having lunch together in the park, and pretending it was totally normal for a boss and his junior designer to suddenly be eating sandwiches on the same bench every day. We did talk to HR together on Thursday, explained the situation, filled out the necessary disclosure forms. And the HR director, who was this wonderful woman named Sandra, just smiled and said she'd been wondering when we'd figure it out because apparently the entire office had been taking bets on how long it would take for us to admit we liked each other. Friday night, Ryan picked me up at my apartment and met Picasso, who immediately loved him, which I took as a good sign, and we went to this amazing farm-to-table restaurant with candles and soft music and food, Thadisted. Like art? We talked for hours about everything we'd been holding back, all the times we'd almost said something, all the moments we'd misread or second-guessed, all the ways we'd been falling for each other without realizing the other person was falling too. Ryan told me about the first time he knew he was in trouble. It was when I'd stayed late to help him with a pitch deck and I'd ordered us pizza and I'd somehow remembered that he didn't like mushrooms even though he'd only mentioned it once weeks before, and he said that kind of attention, that kind of caring it, made him realize I was special. I told him about my first day, how I'd taken one look at him and thought I was doomed, and he laughed and said that's funny because he'd looked at my portfolio, thought we'd hired someone who was going to be challenging him within a year, and he was excited and intimidated in equal measure. We held hands across the table, and when he drove me home, he walked me to my door like a proper gentleman.
Oh!
And when he kissed me goodnight, it was soft and sweet and perfect. And I thought about how a crumpled poem in my pants pocket had somehow led to this moment that was 6 months ago, and now Ryan is my boyfriend, my partner, my creative soulmate. And yes, still my boss, though we've navigated the work, relationship stuff with a lot of communication and boundaries and support from our amazing team. We still work late together sometimes, but now we do it at his apartment or mine. And we still finish each other's sentences, but now we also finish each other's kisses. And we still debate typography and color theory, but now we also debate whose turn it is to cook dinner, and whether Picasso prefers Ryan or me, which is honestly still up for debate. I keep that poem in a frame on my nightstand, and Ryan says it's his favorite birthday present he's ever received, and I tell him I'll write him a new one every year, and he says he'll hold me to that. Looking back, I realize that everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. The late nights and the longing looks and the missed signals and the found poem, all of it leading to this beautiful, complicated, wonderful relationship with someone who sees me and challenges me and loves me for exactly who I am. My boss was shocked by what he found in my pants that night when my phone fell on the floor. But what he found was more than just a poem. It was permission to stop hiding, to take a chance, to believe that sometimes the best things in life come from being brave enough to write down your feelings and careless enough to leave them in your pocket where fate can find them. And that's our story. The story of how I fell in love with my boss and how a piece of paper changed everything. And I wouldn't change a single moment of it, not even the parts where I wanted to die from embarrassment, because all of it led me here, to him, to us, to this life we're building together, one design project and one dinner date and one crumpled poem at a time.